Who is to blame for all of the problems we see in America today? Why, it's the Democrats. At least that is a story if all you look at are the so-called conservatives on television. The Democrats control the media. The Democrats control the government. The Democrats control everything. For the uninformed, this answer sounds plausible. But let's give you just a couple of examples of where we in the John Birch Society exposed a problem and what was behind it, and nothing was done by the Republicans to stop it. First, let's look at the massive influx of drugs into our country. This is a book called Red Cocaine, The Drugging of America, written by Dr. Joseph Douglas back in 1990. We talked about this book several times in our magazine. We also carried articles decades ago talking about the problem and who was behind it. In Dr. Douglas' book, he exposed that Russia and its satellites, Cuba, Bulgaria, Hungary, and East Germany, and Nicaragua, were behind the influx of opiates into Europe and the United States. Actually, it was a fully documented account of something we'd been saying in our magazine for quite some time before the book was printed. Also, it was the Chinese Communist Party through the People's Liberation Army. They were in charge of the raising of opium in the Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia, and then exporting it through a variety of drug cartels which they controlled. It was killing thousands of Americans each year. This information was well known behind the scenes, yet the various Republican administrations or the Democrats did enough to do anything that actually stopped the flow, or, for that matter, even decreased the flow of drugs into the United States. The federal government did not seem to be interested in the communist origin of the drug problem at all. Instead, once it became the policy to invade Afghanistan, the news was broadcast that it was Afghanistan which was the problem with growing poppy fields for the production of opium. So we were given two reasons for our invasion. One, that terrorism against the United States emanated from there, and two, so did the opium problem with the growing of poppies in Afghanistan. Interestingly, this production has actually increased since we went into Afghanistan. It is then shipped through a variety of communist organizations and terrorist groups across the Middle East, including Kurdish groups, then into Albania, and from there to around the Western world. Now we hear that fentanyl has become a problem and is killing thousands of Americans every year. It comes from China. We supposedly have a drug war that has been waged by both Democrat and Republican administrations, yet the number of deaths due to drug overdoses has risen every year for the 3 decades we've been waging this supposed war. The total people killed by overdoses over the last 3 decades far exceeds the number of people who've been killed by COVID. But where is the massive campaign against these killers? If there is one, we've not seen it succeeding. Well, we see drugs being interdicted once in a while at the border, but never is the source attacked, either physically or even in the media, in a manner that will stop the problem. There is no question that the drug problem constitutes a war by the communists against the people of the United States. Yet our government, Republican or Democrat, can't seem to want to put a stop to it. We in the John Birch Society have documented the problem and its source for several decades. We've supposedly controlled Afghanistan, yet the poppy crop keeps growing. Another problem that both Republicans and Democrats have engaged in is the buildup of the communist empire. We could spend an hour on this subject alone, but let us just give one example. In our magazine, The New American, we have continually reported on the fact that both Republican and Democrat administrations sold military capabilities to the Communist Chinese for their Navy, for their Air Force, and their Army. The Russians were doing the same thing at the same time that we were. Both Russia and the United States were building the military capabilities of China at the same time. Yet the story was that we needed to be friendly with China to thwart the threat of Russian communism, so we helped build up Chinese communism. The John Birch Society has always said that the idea that the Chinese and the Russians are enemies is false, and being used to build up one or the other communist nation, depending on who needed our help the most at the time. In other words, Russia is bad, build up China as a bloc against the West. Then China is bad, build up Russia as a bloc against the West. It was and is a Punch and Judy show by America's deep state. There are more examples, but these are a couple to use when discussing just what is going on so that people begin to understand that the problem is right here in America, and it involves the leadership of both political parties and much more. This book, In the Shadows of the Deep State, explains in detail the problem. It isn't simply the Democrats or Republicans, but it does involve many of them, along with others who are in positions of leadership in our country. This book explains a great deal of just what has been and is going on today that the conservative pundits refuse to expose. We urge that you get as many people as you can to read it. Look, Trump knew enough about the deep state to oppose it, but not enough to defeat it. It is the same with the American people. It is up to us, you, to inform more and more people as to what is really behind our problems.